All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Two Bytes with John Dell and Chris Bigler. Today, we got kind of a fun one, maybe a less familiar tool for some that we've discussed previously, but an exciting one nonetheless. Today, we're going to be talking about project management tools. I know this is a discussion and a topic that is really important to me. I've kind of nestled into the whole niche of different project management tools and kind of what they look like. But John, do you kind of want to jump into your background a little bit of project management tools and kind of where you see them in your business and your experience in the past?
Sure. No, I think, like most of us, it started with me just collecting my own personal tasks. I think,
Hmm.
all of us have things thrown at us a million different ways. Email here, hey, we're in a meeting and they're asked, can we follow up this? And you just come to a point where the sticky notes don't really cut it. And so, that's kind of how it started for me, just individually
Yeah.
keeping track of my tasks. I was originally in marketing many, many years ago, and just
Yeah.
keeping track of my potential customers, or almost using it like a business development tracker, or like
Hmm.
a pseudo CRM. But as I started managing teams, that's where it really became a big deal for us, because we were oftentimes collaborating on the same projects that had subtasks, and it became
Yep.
really difficult to kind of have one central point of reference. So we started looking pretty deeply into some of these programs. I think the first one I actually worked with, I think, was Basecamp, and
Okay.
I remember thinking like, oh, like I totally get why that's a huge need right now. To have
Yeah.
some central cloud-based system to manage this. So it's
Yeah.
it's been huge. We use it now. It's an integral part of what we do with our
Yeah.
team, and to how from how we manage and support our clients, to also these collaborative projects that might span many months, multiple departments. We use it.
Yeah.
It's really a lifesaver, and some of the things that are available now really don't have sort of limits that I can see.
Yeah.
They're just so flexible. But to your point, they range, and I think there's
Hmm.
a variety of needs out there in the marketplace, and I think there's a lot of products out there that go this whole spectrum,
Yep.
of just basic task management or full team collaboration. And I think that's really exciting to see. But each one of them, as weird as it is, each one of them can be bent to sort of be used in any single scenario too. So
Yeah.
certainly we got a little bit of a Goldilocks situation, but I think we'll
Yeah.
have some fun exploring some of those.
Absolutely. And I think one really important thing that I want to touch on and kind of why we even started the podcast is that to me, project management tools are kind of the epitome of really overwhelming pieces of technology to get started with. But then
Hmm.
once you get started with those tools, really change the way you work. And I know you and I talked a little bit in episode one and just before we even started the show on, okay, we really want to disarm tech. We want to make it approachable. We really want these things to kind of take some of the rigidness away
Hmm.
and allow other people to get some insight into these tools and how they can help their business without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because as I'm sure we'll talk about later, some of these tools, like you said, can be so flexible. And a lot of times that means you can do anything, but a lot of people end up doing nothing because it's so open ended. So
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a perfect blend of why we started the podcast and we'll kind of jump into the different levels and different tools and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
really fun one for everyone today, I think. So
Oh, for sure. And this is
yeah.
the only other thing I could say, as you get that queued up is, a lot of times with teams, deployment on this can be harder than you think, because you think, hey,
Yep.
this is a productivity tool. This is something that's going to help us better organize. Everybody needs it because everybody's running around with their
Hmm.
hair on fire. But sometimes it becomes like, okay, one more thing. Now I've got to log what I've got to do. So you asked
Right.
me to do something. I've got to write it on my sticky, and now I've got to put it from the sticky into the computer. And then by the time,
Yep.
it can become burdensome. But I think the important thing is, as a manager, that I have found is, when you drive adoption, let's say, like, I'd rather have fewer programs and go all in on
Yep.
one and really commit to it and just say, listen, we're going to use this for everything. And as a manager, I have to use it. I have to be using that as reference points for our meetings. But if you do that, all of a sudden it doesn't become just one extra layer. It becomes
Right.
the foundation. And I think that's
Yep.
where, I think these have all the potential in the world. So I just want to say that before we jump in,
Hmm.
as a well earned piece of advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the perfect breakdown of a lot of these. But we'll kind of jump into the three levels of different project management tools to start because I think it's really important to break these down I think a lot of companies that sell project management software will try and say, oh, no, we're all just productivity tools. And that's really not the case when you get started using some of these things. I think the three categories that we'll break them down into today are to-do lists, which are kind of your virtual sticky notes, right? Or your digital sticky notes. And even that can be super helpful for a lot of people. But then if you want to go up a level, you get kind of into the planner tier of, okay, now I'm planning projects that maybe have multiple steps and kind of want to get a roadmap put together and just figure out what all the different pieces of this project are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you really evolve into some more advanced tools that are more company and department management tools, where you'll see a lot of the kind of final boss or end game project management tools are blending a lot of these different things. So you have project management, you have knowledge hub, or just like stored information about your
Mm-hmm.
company. And it kind of blends the lines between, okay, this is no longer just a to-do list. This is really a home base, or kind of like you alluded to
Yes.
earlier, a foundation for your company, where, okay, now I'm not using a to-do list and then a Google Docs or something else. Now I'm really roping all of these into one foundational piece of software. And so not all three of these are going to be a perfect fit for every company or every listener today, but I think it's important that we kind of break those down into those three tiers before we jump into talking about what tools are and where they fit on that spectrum. So,
Totally. And obviously with these three tiers, you can have so many different products within each one. But today we're going to really focus in tight on just a handful of them. Certainly not comprehensive, but Chris, take us through what those three, and looking at them maybe in sort of like simple, medium, and maybe a little bit
yeah.
more robust in terms of the
Mhm.
offering. So what products specifically are we looking at?
Yeah, I think Microsoft does a really good job of offering different counterparts to each of those three buckets that we've talked about. I think, as we'll get into later in our discussion, that these may not be the best overall tools in the business, but they at least check the box in all three of those. So, kind of the first one is Microsoft To Do. It's just a really simple to do list app that allows you to create different to do lists, whether it's a grocery list, whether it's your digital sticky notes of, I just got to get this done today. Um, it works really well for that. Doesn't have a lot of functionality outside of that, but that's kind of your first example of a to do list style project management system where you really just have your 1, 2, 3 list of items, and that's it. And then kind of jumping into that second tier with Planner. Microsoft Planner is your kind of one-off project. So it's that step up from a to-do list where, okay, maybe I need to create subtasks now. Maybe I need to really kind of roadmap out what all of the different objectives are in this project. Um, but where Planner kind of falls short is the overall integration of like, okay, now I need to kind of discuss these things, the overall collaborative nature of it, or just some bigger scope projects kind of start to fall apart because Planner really is just kind of your one-off
Mm-hmm.
project management system. And so, and kind of the third tier, which is a new tool for Microsoft, is called Microsoft Loop. I know we discussed this on the last episode, but wanted to throw it in here because that's really Microsoft's stab at a company management or department management system where you're kind of blending the lens between documents and project management. And so you're introducing knowledge hubs and information systems into your projects, because a lot of times I think, as we find, what really makes you need that second tool when you have the to-do list is, well, I want to talk about these tasks, I want a place to
Mm-hmm.
discuss these things, and a lot of times I need to store information and we need to brainstorm about these. And so this is more of kind of a Canvas style or like an open whiteboard application where it really lets you shape kind of how that project looks or how it's managed. And so those are kind of the three tiers. And I think Microsoft has all of those checked off. There's obviously a lot of different tools in those buckets, but a lot of those are familiar ones for the listeners, being 365 subscribers and stuff like that. And so I think that kind of lays the landscape pretty well in terms of how all that is broken down. So
And they're free, right? I mean, with
Yep.
meaning with an Office 365 subscription. So I think anytime we're talking about, if you just want to get in there and play around, Microsoft's amazing because each of these tools is available. If you got a Note 365 subscription, look for it in your apps. Even if you use
Yeah.
cloud email, go to the little, couple of dots up in the left corner, pick out that app, test it out. It doesn't hurt anything, but there's certainly
Yeah.
not going to be, the ceilings are low, but the floors are pretty high actually, and they
Yep.
allow you to do things from simple shopping lists, i.e. task lists,
Yep.
up to something where Loop, like I think we talked about in the earlier episode, probably the future of where this is
Yep.
really going to go. And if Microsoft were to actually expand on that and to continue developing that, that could be a game changer for a lot of orgs. But planners just sort of stuck in the middle, like a lot of the stuff today. But
Yeah.
it's all there, and if you want to experiment without spending any money, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Microsoft actually does a pretty good job of integrating these across their 365 suite. So a lot of people are probably already familiar with To Do without even knowing it by just seeing the little check icon in Outlook.
Yeah.
It sits right there. It pops out in a side menu where you can just have it accessed from anywhere, which is awesome. I think for those simple, low entry tools, it works really well. But yeah, I think as we talked about, there's an evolution to them and an entry point for everyone as well. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Right on. So let's now take it maybe up a notch, right? Let's
Yep.
pretend that you're in a situation where maybe you've worked with To Do or Planner, and you feel like there's a little bit of limitations. You want to look at something that's a little bit more purpose built, maybe a little bit more widely used in the industry. And that's something you may look at a product like Trello.
Yep.
And a lot of people use that. This is something that we used to use. We recently actually migrated away from it just because we kind of outgrew it a little bit. But it's a really great tool, really fun, really easy to use. And I'll go ahead and demo a little bit here for you, Chris, if you think
Yeah.
the timing is right. All right, so let's go ahead and do this, and we'll do the right screen here. Sorry, I think I get a little bit better at this by now. Okay, so I'm in Trello here, and Trello gives you a lot of functionality. And I should start by saying Trello's free to start. It's a really incredible bit of functionality that is available just by simply creating an Atlassian account. Trello is actually pretty closely related, although they were developed separately initially, to the whole Jira, Confluence, Atlassian area. And that's a really robust platform for a lot of orgs, a lot of big orgs, a lot of very IT and development sprints, things like that. But
Right.
Trello is sort of like its fun little brother, right? It's easy for anybody to get into and use.
Yep.
And there's a lot to like about this. So look, what you're looking at here is essentially my personal workspace. You can organize workspaces in different ways, but they deal with what they call boards, okay? And I'm going to click on my task board that we're going to be using today. And this is what we call a Kanban board style
Did we lose
of
you?
either project management or task management. And Kanban is actually Japanese for signboard,
Still there,
right? So
John?
the idea here is that these individual components
Hello?
are separated into cards, and it just makes it visually very easy for you to look at these and say, okay, and you can catalog these cards into different, you might want to call them buckets or whatever you want to call them here. In this case, in this Kanban board, you've got one area called templates. You've got a brainstorming, a to-do, a doing, and a done. So you can kind of see some fairly linear left to right workflow here that is taking place. And I've got some sample cards that I've developed. So this is kind of Trello in a nutshell. You manage tasks, you move them around, when things go from, what you're actively planning for, it might move out of the brainstorming phase and into the to-do phase. And you just simply drag it over to organize it if you want to. This is kind of how everything works, but there's a lot more functionality built in, and we'll jump in that right now. So first, let's just say we need to create a new task, right? So let's pretend that I've got to pay some taxes, and so that's something I've got to do. So in this case, I'm going to jump right to the to-do board. I'm going to go ahead and enter a card title. In this case, it may be Pay Iowa Tax, okay, Q2. So I could just do it as simple as that. In 2 seconds, I've got sort of a really bland little card here. But what I can also do is click into it, and I can add a lot more information. So I might want to put a description here. I may want to add something like a date, right? When is this due? So it's important to note you can actually create start dates and due dates in Trello, which is really, really helpful. But yeah, let's pretend that I've got to get this done here by April 19th. And then they also have some different flags and tags you can use. Labels is something that's just color coded. You can customize what these are. Obviously, I've got a couple different ones. I've also got a management one that you couldn't see. So I'll go ahead and select that, and you can see it's tagged it with management. It's tagged it with the due date. If this is something where maybe a team member was working on this, I might want to watch it and get notifications. You can click on that. And then I can also journal some activity, right? I say I can call New Jersey and they didn't answer, right? So you log that and go ahead and save that sort of activity. It'll give it a timestamp. Right now it says just now. If I were to look into that a little bit later, it'd be the actual date and time. And you can keep doing this again and again. And, there's really no limit here, but it's a nice way of collecting all the activity in a given task, which is really important, especially if these have a lot of activity that go on and on and on, especially if you're a manager that needs to pop in and say, okay, when are these taxes going to get paid? So this is certainly an easy way to get this task set up. And now if I go back to my main thing, you can see here that I've got all my tasks. This is here now flagged. I know this is a management task. Actually, if you click on that, you can actually see the labels a little bit cleaner. It's just a really nice visual way for me to see, okay, what do I need to do? What am I currently working on? And what have I already finished? And I can see all that without really having to dig too deep. So I really, really like that part of it, but it'll even go a little bit deeper. So let's use a couple of different examples. And today we're going to look at this other project I've got, which is over here in customer support. It's the integration with this, made up Heave CRM. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this. Now, a couple of things I want to point out. Again, you can see I've got my title, my label, my due date. I've also got a full description about what we want to do, whoever created this. But I've also got sort of this separate checklist here. And this is really cool because you can actually just hit this little checklist button. I can actually create a second one. I'm going to call this follow up, if I can spell. And I'll add that down here. And I just have to do this, call that, and just quickly enter in all these little checklist items. And as I go along, I can just check them off. And you can see I've got this handy little progress bar that will show me how I'm doing on this task. And again, if you close this task, you can actually see I've got 6 checklist items and I've completed 3 of them. So again, from a manager standpoint, or for me, I can quickly jump in and say, okay, I'm moving pretty close and pretty far along. So that is something that I think is really, really helpful. And again, I can set different dates. If I want to add a start date, which is off by default, I go ahead and do that. And that'll give you some idea about the length of this project. So again, all of this is in the free version and it works really, really well. And now, let's pretend I want to give you 2 other examples because I want to demo a couple different things here, but completing tasks, right? So once you complete it, it's a couple of ways you can do it. Manually, so let's go to this scope for Arvont Medical. So let's say I've done this, right? I sent scope to Brian. Okay, so I might log it there. And if I'm done, I'm going to check it off and say, cool, I'm done with that. And then that'll give me an idea. It's green. It knows I've done it by the date I needed to. And then I can just move it over into the done card. And for all intents and purposes, it's good. But one of the things that Trello also is really good at is automation. And they do offer you some automation in the free version. And these are called by way of custom buttons. So you can actually click on add button and you can create your own custom workflow logic that helps you do a couple of things. So I've created one called complete. This is just a very basic task completion automation. But in this case, let's say I need to record this 2Bytes episode. So, I don't know, maybe I say done with Chris today. And I just won't even spell it. You're not Christ, you're Chris. I'm sorry. So I'm done. I've commented that. If I want to finish this task, I can now click this little automate button. It's going to quickly think about what it's got to do and fire through all these things. And now I won't touch anything else, but you'll see that my 2Bytes episode automatically moved to the done pile. And this due date was selected automatically. That's just an automation I created through very simple natural language, right? This isn't custom programming in Trello, and it kind of keeps track of everything there for me. So you can see here, really, really useful. And the last very quick thing I will demo is templatizing. So it's not really a word, but over here, I've created this separate little bucket for templates. And if you'll click on this, you can see this is onboarding a new employee. And you can see it's got a lot of, it's pre-labeled, it's got no due dates, it's got some IT tasks, some HR tasks, some training tasks, all these things I need to do whenever a new employee comes on board. And this is, again, put yourself in the mind of anybody. This could be a manager. This could be a small business owner like myself. This could be just an IT person that needs to have the same process repeated. Well, guess what? This actually is a template, right? I've created this card and I just said, make this a template. You see how this little box here is checked? That's all it is. Now, when I have a new employee onboarding, I just create a new card from this template. I will go ahead and add this over to the to-do list, and I'll create the card. And you'll see here, over in my to-do, I've got onboard employees. So all I need to do here is I got to say onboard Joanne, okay? And I'm done. So I can just start working on all the little tasks for setting up Joanne, and this card can continue to move along in its process while we still got this template here. So all this stuff I really love. And again, it's a really, really great product. You may be wondering, if you love it so much, why did you recently leave? The point is, it kind of goes into some of my pros and cons, because I think when you're talking about Trello, what I love is you can see this interface is very intuitive, right? You don't have to think much about it. The colors are pretty. Everything's sort of spelled out for you. Um, it's also really powerful for a free product, and it's great for small teams. This is a great thing too. It's not just your task. You could have multiple boards, right? You could have each employee have their own boards. You could have certain customer tasks have their own boards. Separate projects have their own boards. You can collaborate on that, but it's all free. I think up to, you have like 10 boards per workspace, which I think is fairly generous for small teams. You get all that
Yep.
functionality, and it's great. Where I sort of get off the bus with this a little bit is really that I don't like having a lot of these features that you'll see, because we didn't cover a lot of these ones. A lot of these features that you'll come across sometime maybe um, paid versions. Okay, so if you want to do certain other things, and I'm trying now, power ups and things like that, they're all sort of paid services. If you want to have different views, so you see here, I've got a workspace, a table, and a calendar view instead of the Kanban view. That you can experience that, but you've also got to start a 30-day free trial to really get the most use out of it. And
Yeah.
again, I don't love that personally, and I think that ultimately when you do compare the paid version with some of Trello's competitors, to me it's lacking a little bit. So for the same money, if I were to move to a product like Notion, if you will, I think you just get a lot more bang for your buck there than you do
Yeah.
with the paid version of Trello. So, Chris, I know you've probably used
Mhm.
this a little bit as well. I mean, any
Yeah.
any insider thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the core feature set and kind of the core customer for Trello is that it absolutely kills the free to try experience in terms of I can use that for free for a long time before I feel like I need more out of the tool. I think both you and I, from the information background or the data background, a little bit understand that, like, okay, the data structures of these tools are really important, and how Trello has their data structures built, it really is kind of for that. Okay, I have one big task list and I just kind of move things through the different levels of that. But the second I try to kind of go one level up or get the 30,000-foot view of this, it really struggles to do that. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
where you talked about moving to Notion. They do that kind of zoom in, zoom out really well in terms of seeing what the company progress is as a whole, or kind of managing different projects. To me, in my past with using Trello, it's great for kind of the people that just need to get their sticky notes into a system, and then they can move them through.
Mm-hmm.
They can add comments. So it's one step above kind of Microsoft To Do, where you're adding these discussions and you're adding different sub checklists and stuff like that, which is extremely helpful. But I think it gets a bit overwhelming when you try to do too much with it. And to me, that's kind of where the underlying data structures start to really limit it as a tool. Because
Yeah.
it started out with this, oh yeah, I just move these through the Kanban board. Um, Kind of prerogative, like that was their main mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to note when you're selecting your first project management system is what is the core feature, or like why was this tool built? Because I think as you'll see now, a lot of tools are starting to kind of break outside their comfort zones in terms of, oh, we need to add these features that these other tools do and we need to compete. But that really wasn't from the ground up why that tool was built in the first place. So does it do it
Mm-hmm.
well? I think that's a really important thing. And that's what I felt really strongly about with Trello, is that it was built with a really core feature set, and that core feature set operates really well. But now that they've kind of dabbled a little bit outside of that core feature set, it feels like those tools are really holding on to the past of what that core feature was. And so,
Sure.
and that tends to limit it a bit. So,
Totally.
yeah. That's kind of been my experience with Trello, but kind of talking about your use cases going from Trello to a tool like Notion. I know
Hmm.
we talked about the zoom in, zoom out, but what originally kind of spurred that change, and like what was it with Trello that you were like, okay, I need to manage this, or kind of some of the core feature sets that got you to go to something like Notion, which is kind of that tier
Hmm.
three project management or company management tool.
Yeah, two big things stuck out for us. We manage a lot of work with specific clients. That a lot of
Hmm.
tasks that come every month, a lot of tasks that are new. And so our team each has sort of different responsibilities, but we started collaborating more. And,
Yeah.
we really started running an issue with, the way Trello we had it organized was really on a personal task board basis. And we couldn't
Right.
really see, and we did that so we can see our own tasks and prioritize our day and our week.
Hmm.
But the problem was, we were going to have to start paying anyway for sort of this power up that allowed the cards to be synced,
Yep.
because you can't have a separate card in your works, your board, and
Yeah.
then me and mine, and have them both update automatically. So that became a challenge we were looking at in terms of, okay, how do we collaborate but still keep individual task levels at the person level and be able to prioritize the plan.
Yep.
The second piece is we needed a knowledge center. So you talked about that.
Yep.
We had a big need for internal documentation. We were doing it in OneDrive. It was okay, but again, we're bouncing system to system. It's like a lot of times we're referencing these things in tasks, or we're building them as part of this.
Yeah.
So for us, when we started looking at solutions, Trello didn't really have that knowledge center. I would have had to buy something like a Confluence
Yep.
separately. And then Notion, really kind of thrilled me just with their interlinking of these different elements, right? You can have a task database, this is what they call it, and you can link
Hmm.
it over to a wiki, or link it to some other, have multiple people assigned to the same task or a subtask list. It was just so robust and so interconnected
Hmm.
that those, again, for a very similar price, if I'm not mistaken, to the
Yep.
Trello entry level tier, and I think very reasonable, something along $8 a month, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. Um, Fantastic. And so that's why we made the
Yep.
move to Notion personally, and
Hmm.
really, really enjoy working with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my experience with Notion as well is that I work with a lot of different clients as well. And what really made me realize the power of Notion is when I get on my weekly sync calls with my clients and I have to screen share. And what the biggest pain in the world for me is normally I won't share my whole screen. So I'll just share one window or one document. I realized when I started working with Notion, I just share Notion and then I have everything I need there for that client.
Mm.
I'm no longer saying, oh, yeah, let me open this Word document where I kept my notes. Okay, let me unshare. And now let me share you back to the to do list that we're looking at. Um, I originally started with Asana as my project management system. Um, and for those who aren't familiar with Asana, it was started by an ex Facebook dev. And so it has this really strong kind of programming background and framework for the structure in which you can organize and manage your companies and departments. They are kind of the rigid cousin to Notion in terms that they're both in kind of that company and department management tier. But if you feel like Notion is a bit too open ended, Asana is great because it says, here's the guardrails with this, here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do, and here's how you have to structure it. I think for a lot of people that maybe aren't looking to be as creative with their knowledge hub or their company home base, it's an incredible tool. But for me, I really needed kind of the ability to break out of some of those guardrails and bounds where, okay, I want to go one level deeper or I want to go one layer up. And with Asana, you have portfolios and then you have projects and then you have tasks. So portfolios are kind of the big buckets of what those projects live in. So that would be like a marketing portfolio. And then within that, you have all the different marketing projects and the tasks associated. Um, you can't go up a level or even down a level past subtasks with that. And so that's where I really kind of started to feel some of the growth or kind of the growing out of Notion or Asana. But I think kind of with Notion being that all-in-one tool, that really allowed me and kind of drew me in as well, to where it it sounds like the silliest thing, but when you're screen sharing to a client, it's like, okay, I don't need to bounce between all these different systems.
Hmm.
And it's almost that light bulb moment of like, oh, I don't need 5 different tools now. I don't need to open a
Yeah,
Word
it's
doc. I
also for
don't.
you.
Yeah,
You're not
exactly.
bouncing.
Yeah. So everything is in one spot. And I think
Yeah.
when you start to talk about how the tools are evolving as well, I know one of the key features for you when we talked about Notion was Notion AI,
Yeah.
and how that really changes your workflow. And I know Notion has talked about this pretty deeply in terms of their philosophy, but they want you to be able to kind of just dump your brain into Notion and then recall any of those different things at any time. And so they've launched a feature called Notion Q&A, and it's really just kind of an AI chatbot within Notion, but it's probably one of the best iterations of AI tools in an application that I've seen. And so it allows you to ask for any certain piece of information, and then it'll return what it thinks that information is, but then it'll also source out where it grabbed that information from and link you
Hmm.
directly to that document or that page. And so for us that are kind of constantly wearing different hats and you're kind of bouncing between different workspaces, or even you have multiple employees managing different documents and different clients, you can get that information at your fingertips at any notice. And so
Hmm.
I think that feature set really kind of ties into the last kind of philosophical reason for selecting a tool. And one thing that's really important for me is that I want a tool that's going to grow with me throughout the use of it. Because I think all of us, and especially the listeners, will kind of tie themselves back to this moment of like, okay, I'm choosing this thing. This feels like a big moment. I'm onboarding to this new software. Um, and if that software is going to stay at that point or with that scope for the rest of time, you're probably going to get to a point kind of like you just went through of, oh gosh, now I got to select a new one and it's just so
Yeah.
stressful and it's overwhelming and like, what do I do? Um, and that's where I think Notion does a really good job. It's that it's very careful about how it's evolving, so you don't run into the Trello example of, okay, this was the core feature, but these other things are in here now, but they're not implemented
Hmm.
well. I think Notion started with a wide enough scope to say, okay, how do we improve kind of this second brain or this knowledge hub, and allow people to get more done without having to think about doing it? Barrier to thought is a really big core philosophy for them, and I think it kind of echoes true throughout all the launches of their products within Notion. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the third tier comparison for those of you that are looking for company and department management tools. Asana versus Notion. I think there's some other ones out there as well. I think ClickUp tries to be that as well, but it is often a master of none
Hmm.
in my experience with it. But I think for those of you that are looking for a more structured system, Asana is great. And I think John has probably felt this. The creative flexibility of a tool like Notion just kind of reigns supreme, especially once you get into their future roadmap, the calendar integration, and all that stuff. That I'm sure we'll talk about in future episodes, because John and I have kind of found the Goldilocks situation, as he alluded to at the start of this, really does everything for us, and we're really excited about where this tool's going. So.
Well, that's what's crazy. You said it, and it's weird to be sitting here wrapping up the episode talking about, okay, Notion, more to come. Because I know we'll do a standalone on Notion because we both
Yep.
use it and use it heavily. But you know, you also started by saying, that was sort of the one that can be very overwhelming. And
Yep.
so we had an employee on board, and she kind of came at us and she's like, hey, 3 months in, she's like,
Yeah.
you ever thought about using Notion? I used it with my last company. And so she
Mm-hmm.
like demoed it for me. And I was just sitting there, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what is it? And we talked it through, and I'm just like, it didn't move me at all. I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't understand because it didn't have
Yeah.
that shape. And then it was 2 years later that
Mm-hmm.
now, we had gotten to the point of bursting where we just couldn't stay on that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And talking with you about Notion, I'm like, maybe I ought to give it a different look. And certainly they had changed a little bit. I think they had
Oh
some
yeah.
features that you said were very new. They're
Mm-hmm.
really important to us. But all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, like of course, like I do need all of this stuff now. I just
Yeah.
didn't really realize it then. So
Mm-hmm.
that full circle when you come to it, because what is it? It's everything. Well, how do you describe everything? It's just kind of a white canvas, like you
Yeah.
go nuts. And that's a weird thing to wrap your head around, but it is cool
It
once
is.
you dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important to call out too for those of you that may use Notion in the past, like it really has transformed and I want to say just kind of matured into a true product and understands its purpose in the project management or the productivity space. I mean, you go 2 years back, they didn't have tasks, they didn't have projects, they
Hmm.
didn't have sprints, which is such a key part of project management systems. It really used to be just a documentation tool, which was really helpful for people. And you could do checklists in there. So you could kind of create all this stuff yourself. But they've done an incredible job of adding these core features as a part of the product now, to really round out kind of what users are looking for without them having to create it themselves.
Hmm.
Notion also does an incredible job with their out of the box templates for just getting ideas started. And I think Notion AI also allows you to just brainstorm and build out different templates on your own as well. And you can kind of describe that in the typical prompt fashion that you
Hmm.
would with other AI tools. But if you have tried Notion in the past and maybe weren't clicking with it, I would definitely say give it another try. It's changed a lot as a product over the last 2 years. Um, and that's coming from somebody who's tried it 3 separate times over the last 4 years. And very much like you, John, I had that moment of like, okay, this tool looks really pretty. They absolutely nail the aesthetics, but like I can't get anything done. So like why am I gonna do this? Um and so I that third time around it finally clicked for me and I was like, okay, no, this makes sense. And for me, that moment was really the introduction of projects, tasks, sprints, out of the box as a part of Notion. They've also added a homepage now, which I think is almost essential to every
Brilliant.
project management system,
Yeah.
where okay, now I don't need to drill down into these tools, but I'll cut myself off here before I just go on on a full tangent. But
I feel the tug too, because I want to
yeah,
go into like some things I don't care about, but it's like no, no,
yeah,
no, that's for another time, because
it,
that's another microcosm of just how deep you can go with any
yeah,
of these programs, right? You just keep going to
exactly.
meet the need. What
Hmm.
meets your need as a company? Are you a small
Yeah,
team, large team? Are you a technical support team? Are you a
yep,
marketing team? Are you a sales team? I mean,
yeah,
there's uses and applications for everybody, and I could make a use case in a Trello board for any one of those, right?
yep,
So a lot of the stuff when you're starting on, or if you go the Microsoft Suite, I
yep,
don't think you can go wrong. My only last parting piece of advice would be to reiterate, look at it, do your due diligence, play around with it from
yep,
a leadership standpoint. Then when you're ready to deploy, jump in with both feet and
yep.
really, really push it to the limit, because otherwise it's just going to be another software. And if you don't get adoption,
Hmm.
this doesn't really work, does it?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it. Really just allowing people to experiment right out of the gate. There is no wrong answer with these, but assessing your needs before you go through that product selection, and I think it really makes a world of a difference. And then, like you
Yeah.
said, dive in head first after that, and really see where you can push it. Um, and then that'll kind of give you all the answers you need out of it. So whether they're good or bad. So
Yeah, really.
yeah,
No, that's
but
great. Well, I appreciate the talk about this. I think more to come
yeah,
on Notion for sure. And then if anybody else, if you guys have anything that we missed or anything we ought to
yeah.
explore that you use and you like, please feel free to
Hmm.
leave it in the comments, and we'd love to explore that with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as John kind of alluded to, our next episode will be a Notion deep dive. We'll kind of go into our setups and all the different feature sets. I think we teased that pretty heavily today. But yeah, we're excited to kind of talk about it with you guys and see what you have to say down in the comments and tell us what tools you're using as well. And we can kind of jump into thoughts on those or kind of touch on some that maybe catch John and I's eye that we weren't aware of previously. So
Absolutely.
yeah, appreciate everyone listening today and jump back in for Notion Deep Dive coming next episode.